All right, what I want to start playing with here is learning how to display an opening title sequence of a movie, a TV show, something like that, where we just show some interesting graphics, the people who are involved with the show, actors and the producers and things like this, and the production companies. So we're just going to play around with how we're going to introduce some of that. So let's just get started here. I'm just going to give you some basic ideas. I've already created one which I'm going to borrow from, so let's start looking at that. So I'm going to create the new composition, 1920 1080 square pixels, 24 frames per second. We're going to start with full resolution, and it's going to be 90 seconds altogether, minute and 30 seconds. So we're just going to play around with that. Background color doesn't matter to start, but what I should definitely probably do is name this properly, opening title sequence. And remember, this, we're going to have potentially more than one composition. We definitely want more than one composition here. Keep ourselves organized. So make sure you name, label all your compositions, because it's definitely going to come in handy when you're going through your project and using them. And just keep in mind, you're going to have a main one, so we'll say that this is going to be our main one. We could also call it main, but for the most part, we're just going to leave it at that. What I want to start with, I just want to start with a basic foundation. So I'm just going to make a layer comp, layer new, and I'm just going to make a solid layer, and I'm just going to have a certain color here. I've chosen one before. It was this particular blue that I was using for the one I had. I'm just going to use that for now. It's the same composition, same dimensions as it. I'm just going to say okay, so it fits perfectly. Great. I could always change this up later if I want to. You could change any solid just by going to layer and solid settings. If you have your solid selected, layer, solid settings, and you can go back and change whatever you want. If you want to change the color, you want to change the dimensions, you want to change anything, you just say okay, not a problem. If you double click on it, it does open up into the footage here, and I can just close that and go back to our normal composition here, which is what I want to see. Mainly what's happening in an open title sequence is you have type, you have some words, you're explaining the different people that are involved in this movie or this TV show, and we're just going to explain them in a certain way, or show them in a certain way. But there is a certain tone that we're trying to create. If it's like an X-Files kind of show, it's going to be mysterious and creepy and kind of, depending on how the music you use to bring that in, there's definitely going to be some music involved. Or in a situation like I have with Nacho Libre, it's kind of fun and kind of more interesting colors chosen and things like this. So there's going to be definitely mood that you're going to set for the opening of the movie or the TV show. If no one's ever seen it, you're going to be like, okay, here's the opening sequence. I'm going to prepare you for it. So this is kind of what we have to keep in mind when we're doing that. So I have a background here. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to kind of help you along and understand how maybe you might want to work with this. So there's going to be plenty of things that you do that I don't do and vice versa, but we're just going to play around here. Number one, I just want to show you how to do some basic work with type, some typography that you might ever be familiar with, Kinetic typography. So let's just type in a name here. Now I know that I have a certain person in this movie, Jack Black, so I'm just going to type in their name. Now I've already have Gotham chosen, love this typeface, and I'm just going to play around with that. So I'm just going to press Command on my keyboard or Control on a PC, double click on the anchor tool, and then it's just going to center that anchor point for me inside there. I'm just going to increase the size of this, hold down Shift to keep it proportional, and once again I'm just going to play around with roughly what I could do here, a line, and I'm going to align a line so it's right in the middle. Maybe I'm going to change the color. I can click on it, change the color to white, so I'm just going to click on that there. Now it's white. Let's see what kind of ideas we could play with here. So realistically, what we want to do is, in any situation, right now, this is my full time here I have. It's brought all the way down, so I see my full 90 seconds. So a minute is up to here, and then another 30 seconds. So what's going to happen is type is going to come in, type is going to leave. So how am I going to bring type in and take type away? Now realistically, what you should probably do is potentially storyboard as well. So create a storyboard and maybe actually make a scene by scene. So here's a scene and a bunch of things happen. Okay, let me storyboard another scene and a bunch of things happen. The way I grouped mine was I did a bunch of production companies. I did those first, then I created another scene where I did the name of the movie, then I did another scene where I named all the actors in the movie, then I did another scene with certain costume designers and casting, and then I did one more scene with all the producers and the directors. So you could set it up into scenes as well if you wish. That would definitely help you out, but depending on how you choose to do yours, it might change. Either way, that might be one way to work with it. Storyboard and then do that. design one way you want it to look, and then how the animations are going to look in there. So let's say we want to do a little bit of a range selector. So I'm just going to click on my text, I'm going to click on animate, and I'm going to do a range selector. Let's play around with position. So I'm just going to bring a position range selector. So I'm just going to say, yep, the initial transform parameters are all set up here. This is exactly what it's going to look like. This is where it's going to end up. So what I want my range selector to do, I'm going to twirl that down. I'm going to say, you know what, let's change the position to come in from the top. So I'm just going to move that Y. I'm going to scrub it over. If I hold down shift, it goes faster. If I hold down command, it goes slower. And if I just don't hold on anything, it just goes at a normal pace. The interval changes like that. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm just going to do a start animation here. So I'm going to click on start, and I'm going to create, click on the stopwatch. I'm going to create a keyframe right here. I'm going to move it over a little bit, and I'm going to end at 100%. So what's going to happen, it's all going to come in that way. All right, that's it. So I did a start animation at 0%, and I ended that start animation at 100%. So everything at 100% will be here. Perfect. And that's my simple, very easy animation here. But you know what? I didn't want everything to come in at once. I don't want each character to come in at once. So I'm going to go to my advanced, and instead of it being the based on characters, I'm going to change it to, let's just try words. Okay, let's see what happens when we do to words. So the advanced option, okay, so it's going to come in word by word. That's great. It's going a little slow. So what I can do, I'm just going to click on that one keyframe and bring it up. Now, just a little helpful tip here. If I'm going to move with keyframes, what I can do is I can click on the keyframe, and I can actually move that keyframe frame by frame by holding down Option and my left or right arrow key. See, it's moving frame by frame, holding down Option or Alt on a PC, and I'm using the left arrow and then the right arrow, so I could incrementally move it if I need to. The other one I could do is actually I can move my CTI, my current time indicator, the same way, but instead of holding on Option, I'm going to hold down Command, or I could hold on Control on a PC, and the same thing. Now I'm moving it frame by frame on my, using my arrow keys as well, left and right. So if I bring this all the way and I do it this way, you'll see it's frame by frame. I'm moving it that way. And once again, if I choose a keyframe, there it is, and I hold down Option and move it, I'm moving it frame by frame. So that might help you understand that a little bit more and maybe get a little bit more specific on where you want your keyframe. So there it is, brought it in, great. Now, once again, if I don't want it to be by the word, I want it to be by the line, so the actual whole line will come in. Well, it's going to bring it in by the whole line. That's great. Well, let's continue on and actually play around with this a little bit more. Let's add another option here. So the animation's already set. That's all I have to do now is add other properties, and they're just going to animate along with it. So I'm going to click on scale. Let's do a scale animation. So let's play around right here. So I'm going to collapse my advanced and look at my scale shows up, and I'm just going to say, you know what, at this point right about here, let's move. I like to go halfway because it gives me an idea of what's actually happening. I'm going to say my scale is going to be a little bit bigger. Well, it's doing it by the individual letters, which is kind of throwing me off there a little bit, which is okay. I can play with that, but I kind of wanted it to play around with the whole word. But because each individual letter has an anchor point, that's going to be a little tricky. Now, I can play around here with the the more options, and I can look at anchor point grouping by character or word. See now how it changed, right? Now I actually have one anchor point for each individual word, or I have an anchor point per line. So the anchor point is going to be right here. It's a little hidden. So there are ways to change that, to move that around. So now if I play with my scale, I'm going to move it up. Well, now the whole word moves because I changed, or sorry, the whole line moves because I changed it to line. Well, let's try word. What happens to word? So each word changes. So I don't want that. I definitely want to do it by the line. So there's a way to change how the anchor point works with, playing with range selector. So I'm happy with line. That's great. So that's it. Let's just see what that does, because I did bring up my scale a little bit, maybe up a little bit more. And let's see how this animation plays out. Very simple, very nice. You know what? Let's keep adding to this because there's so much we could add to this. Because once the animation is already set, my main animation of start from 0% to 100%, I could just keep adding and adding and adding. So let's add another one. Let's add a little bit of blur. So right here, my initial blur, I like to go once again halfway to see what it's going to do. My initial blur is going to be, you know, very, very high. So it kind of really disappears and obviously appears. So there we go. Having a little glitchy moment here, just pressing the spacebar to do a RAM preview. I guess that blur really adds a lot more to it, so let's try that one more time and let's see how that goes. Okay, that's it. That's kind of another way to play around with that. There's so many effects and so many different ways to play with kinetic typography. Let's add just one more here. Let's do a little bit of, because that blur is there, it's going to be a little trickier to see, but let's play around with some tracking. Let's see how this goes. So my tracking is going to be up there, the tracking type, tracking amount. I'm just going to do a tracking amount, and I'm just going to bring it up once again. I like to go right about here and to see what's going to happen. So let's bring that up. So it gets a little bit bigger. Now obviously per each individual word you use, because there might be a number of words you use, it's going to be a little bit more tricky to do this for every word, but there should also be a little bit of consistency too with some of the words you bring in. So if you have like 10 different actors and you're bringing them in and maybe even animating them out, you can obviously play around with like really long names or really short names, or however you got to play with it. Maybe it's on 2 lines, or however you do, your animation is going to be a little bit differently. Well, now what if not only did I want to animate it in, I also want to animate it out? Well, that's very simple to do. What I can actually do is select a keyframe. Now remember, the keyframes actually just hold information. This keyframe holds the information at 100%. So right now, this keyframe says, oh sorry, this keyframe right here is saying 0% is happening, 0% is at the start. Then this keyframe is saying this is at 100%. So that's all that it's remembering. So let's actually click on that keyframe, and I'm just going to copy it. Command C, Control C on a PC. I'm just going to move my CTI over to where I want to paste that specific keyframe. I'm just going to bring it right here. I'm going to Command V. That exact keyframe with that exact information just got pasted here. So we could copy and paste keyframes. So I'm just going to move it over a little bit to give the same distance. All right, so I'm just going to move that, and there I go. It's going to animate in and animate out. Now, obviously, we saw what happened. It did a little bit of a bounce. We want it to stick around a little bit longer, because that's an important part of this too. Is not only do we, animate something that's really cool the way it comes in, maybe just fades in or fades out. Well, it's got to stick around so it could be readable. So let's do that too. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to copy this keyframe. It's at 100%. And I'm just going to bring it over here, and I'm going to paste it again. Command V. And there it is. That exact same keyframe just got moved over. And now what's going to happen is it's going to animate in, and it's going to hold for a bit, and then it's going to move out. Now, it's up to you how long you want to keep it, but if it's a longer name, you got to think someone's got to be able to read it. There should be a consistency between all the names that come in, that everyone has the same amount of time. Usually the director stays around a little bit longer than some of the others, or the main actor stays around a little bit longer than the others. I'm just moving these keyframes around to kind of have a little bit more play with a quicker animation in, and then obviously it's going to stick around a little bit longer. So we're definitely going to play around with how we actually play with the type, how it's readable, how it's legible. And once again, if it still goes too slow, you're not too sure, or it's too fast, play around, count it out, like really read the names. Apparently you have to read the name 3 times in order for it to stick around. So if I say okay, it comes up. I say Jack Black, Jack Black, Jack Black. Maybe then I could have stopped it and changed it there. But once again, some names are longer and you want to have consistency. So keep the names up there for a decent amount of time, so that way people can read them and they don't get lost. That's a good way to play around with that. Okay, so we did a bit of range selector there. So what I'm going to do, instead of going around, bringing all these different names in and all that, I'm just going to keep it simple. I'm just going to duplicate this again, and I'm going to shut this one off, and I'm just going to kill everything that's on there. I'm just going to delete my animator 1, and I'm back to normal. There's nothing happening here. It's the exact same. I'm going to reset it, so that's where it is. I'm going to do that same command and double click, and I'm just going to bring the scale up a little bit. There we go. Okay, now what I'm going to play with, a little bit of 3D space. So we've seen what happens when we click on our 3D space here. So on our switches, If you don't see them, once again, you could right click on your main header here for your layer, and you can go to columns and you could turn almost anything on. I like to have my modes on. I like my parent and link switches just in case I want to play around with these. You can actually add in duration in and out. This actually might help you with certain timing and how you want some things. But right now I'm just going to get rid of duration. But once again, I just have what I need open and I want 3D space on. So I'm going to click on the 3D space. Now what happens with my transform? Let's see what happens. Well, a Z axis gets added to anchor point and position and scale. I get my own rotation of my X, Y, and Z, and I get my own 3 now just for my X, Y, and Z as well. My opacity is there as well, and anchor point still stays the same. So now I just get a little bit more option here because now I'm actually working on an X, Y, and Z. Let's see what the Z does. So let's just move this down. This actually is X first. It just bends that way. Great. And once again, it bends and it orients around my anchor point, which happens to be in the middle. So I can play around with that. Let's just do a simple animation here. If I were to play around with, let's do a keyframe here for my orientation. And I'm just going to move it here. And I'm just going to move this. Actually, I'll do the Y. So I'll move on the Y axis and I'm just going to make it disappear kind of like this. Bring it back to 90, so I know exactly I want it to be 90. Great. And this is all it's going to do. Very simple. There it is. And now really slow. That's 5 seconds, so let's bring it down. Great. And now let's pretend I want to bring it back. So let's bring it back. So I'm just going to click on that keyframe because that's a keyframe I want. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to move my CTI over to where I want to paste it. And I'm just going to Command V and paste it. That's it. So now let's see what that does. And it just brings it back. So once again, you can animate in, animate out. Well, what if I wanted the opposite? I want to copy that one. So this is the one that is at 90 degrees. I'm going to paste it over here. I'm going to get rid of this one here because I want it to come in. I want it to be invisible, then visible, then invisible again. Okay, there we go. So I can't see it, and then I can see it, and then it animates out. Now, once again, I could keep it a little bit longer here if I want to. I can copy this keyframe, move it over, or once again I could just click on and make a new keyframe if I wanted to here. Say I'm going to click on this keyframe and I know that this keyframe is 0. It's going to be 0, so I could just bring this keyframe over here, the CTI over, make a new keyframe, make it 0, and therefore I have a little bit longer where you can read the name a little bit longer. Alright, it stays. Great. And then it moves. So that's how 3D space works. Now keep in mind, once you click something in 3D space, you have access to more camera views here, okay? The thing I love to do is actually click on 2 view. You get to 2 views, you get your main active camera here and you get your custom view. Sorry, custom view 1. So if I click on this camera here, I can control it and look at different things. If I click on this camera, this viewport here, I should say, I get my active camera. This is actually what's going to render. This just gives us a help to see what's going on. This is what I actually see. Now this is a little tricky because it's a white graphic on a white background, so can't really see much. But either way, just to show you what can be possible, if I do click on that, I can see roughly what's going on. And if I play it out, or at least scrub through it, I can see that yes, it was kind of going to render that way. That's how it starts, then it renders properly, and then it renders out again. Well, I was like, you know what, I wish I could see that a little bit better. Sure, what you could do, because the only thing I could see in the 3D space is this, because I made a 3D space. I could actually click on my background, this blue that I made, and make it 3D as well. And what's going to happen is going to appear in the 3D space, because now it's 3D. And I could see it now, which is great. Now, what I should do, and this is huge practice, best practice, you gotta label the layers properly. So let's just say blue background or background blue. If you're gonna have multiple backgrounds doing different things, it's a good idea to do that. Okay, so I'm just gonna do that. So what happens is, okay, now I can get a better sense of how it's gonna scrub through. Let me Command minus out there. And I'm just gonna see how, if I scrub through, what's actually happening there. So that's why Jack is getting that part's invisible, because it's actually hiding behind this. So what I want to do maybe is bring my transform and my position, bring my X. Now watch what happens when I move my X back and I have positive numbers, it goes backwards. Negative numbers bring it forward towards the camera. Okay, so now I'm bringing it away. So now if I do that animation, oh, it still gets lost a little bit. Let's bring it out a little bit more. There we go. So now we can see it properly. All right, and there we go. So now that may be able to help you a little bit more. But once again, if you're still having a struggle here trying to see, not a problem. Go to our camera tools here, our orbit. I can click on orbit. I can move it around a little bit. All right. And I can see a little bit better what's going on. Okay, that makes sense. Or I could use my X and Y axis, and I can move that around if I need to. Or I can use my Z axis, and I can move it backwards and move it forward just by clicking and dragging. But of course, command minus, command plus, I could also zoom around. If I need to, I could just press C and dial through the tools. So I'm going to orbit this way a little bit more. Maybe I want to see it this view. Maybe I want to see down here, whatever I want. Doesn't really matter. It's just going to help me to get a better understanding of what's happening here. And that's it. That's how we could utilize that space there. Because we're going to go back to that space a little bit later when we talk about cameras. So that's another way to play around with 3D space. A lot of different ways we can have fun with that too. So that one I'm going to shut off as well. And then I'm going to play around with a little bit of a stroke reveal really quickly just to talk about this. I'm going to command D, which is going to duplicate that. And once again, I'm just going to get rid of that. I'm going to reset everything. I'm going to get rid of these animations here. And I'm also not going to make it 3D. I don't need it to be 3D, so that space doesn't matter. You know, I'm just going to get rid of it. I'm going to go back to one view for a little bit. Command minus. Actually, I'm going to zoom in here a little bit because if to do this a little properly, I'm going to need some help zooming in and looking at my mask. So I'm going to create a mask here, and what it's going to do is the mask is going to help me reveal the type stroke by stroke. So let's take a quick look at this. So I have my type selected. I'm going to click on my pen tool, and with the types, with a layer selected, my pen tool is going to be a mask. It's going to create a mask. I can see that there's a mask. It has the cursor has the pen tool, and it has a circle and square next to it, which is the mask option. Now if I didn't have something selected, now just a star, meaning I'm just going to make a basic path, a basic shape. But with a layer selected, I can now make a mask, and this is what I want to do. And I want to make a mask that flows with each stroke. So each brush stroke of these individual letters is what I want to follow. So let's start that. So I'm just going to click and drag, making a path. Holding down Option, I can play around with that too. There you go. There's my first path. To get rid of the path so it doesn't continue, I'm going to press Command and click. Now the path is there, and it shows right here that the mask was made. And now what I can do, I can start a new path. So I'm going to click and drag, come down here. Now you're going to see what happens later when you actually play around with these. What happens, maybe you want to fine tune them. You can always go back and change these individual paths. We don't want to actually close any of these paths. Then an actual mask will be made, which we don't want. Oh, see, I did that. I didn't want that to happen. So what I'll do is I'm going to press Command, and I still have my pen tool active with my mask, but I'm just going to click and drag and make a new. But once again, I don't want to complete a path, which is going to happen there. I want to come very close to it. If I need to come even closer, I could zoom in, Command plus, come closer, and see how that works. All right, good. Press Command, and I'm just going to keep going along here. All right, all my mask paths have been placed. So what I could do now, I can select all the masks, and I'm just going to create I'm going to go to an effect here, and the effect is going to be called, it's going to be Generate Stroke, but I can just type in stroke here, or I can go to Generate Stroke here, Generate and Stroke, and if I click on that, because this is already selected, it's going to automatically add that effect to here. So there's the effect right there. Let me go to my effect and control panel, and here it is. Now the way this is going to work, I'm going to click on all masks. So I'm going to utilize all the masks, and I'm just going to bring up my brush size. Now what my brush size is going to do, it's going to cover these letters. And what I want it to do is fully cover the letters. Now right now I have a white. Now it doesn't matter what the color is, but it's a little tricky because my type is white, my mask color is white. Well, I'm going to change up the color to something else. Let's say red, just so I know that my letters are covered. Let's make sure. So if I bring it down, all right, some of the white starts to show through, right, of the actual letter. Well, what I want to happen, I want it to cover fully, but I don't want to go overboard with my brush size. So if I need to fix up any of these, I can go back with my move tool and select any of these paths. Oh, it's selected the background. So what I could do, if something gets in the way, I'm just going to lock it. So now it's not going to bother me anymore. Great. I'm going to go back to that path, and I'm just going to move it over. That's great. And all these other ones seem pretty good. I have a bit of an issue here with that one, but I'm going to bring up maybe my my masks and my brush size just a little bit more. See if it covers. Bring it 7.2. That's looking pretty good, because the idea is we want to fully cover, and what's going to happen is we're going to click on this one down here, paint style, and what's going to happen, we're going to say reveal original image. So that type, once again, it doesn't matter what it is, we're going to reveal the type as it goes, and it's going to look like it's being painted on stroke by stroke. So let's take a look at how we can actually make this happen. I'm going to collapse my masks, and I'm going to open up my effects, and I'm going to go to the start. So I want it to start a certain way, I want it to end a certain way. So how do we do that? So what I can do, I know that my reveal original image, and what I want is I want my type to be nothing at the beginning and then slowly come in. So let's do that. Alright, so what I'm going to do now with this setup, I'm actually want everything to be seen here, but the way I want it to work is I want my end, I'm going to do an end animation. I'm going to click on my end, and I'm going to make this one 0%, and I'm going to bring it over just a little bit, and I'm going to click on this and make it now 100%. And what should happen is it should start from here and it should go that way. So that hopefully will help you play out this particular stroke reveal. So it just revealed the stroke. Once again, it didn't matter what color the stroke was, it disappears anyways. And now I have this kind of, it's showing me, you know, painting on individual strokes, making it seem like it's appearing out of nowhere. And that's how we could play around and do a quick stroke reveal. Okay, so using the generate stroke effect, we could play around with that. You could fine tune things still if you want to, and that's how we play around with a stroke reveal. Pretty simple, but it could definitely be pretty effective. Another thing we could do that I played around with, there actually is another way to do that. It's called trim path. Let me do a quick trim path for you, and we'll kind of have some fun with it, because there's a lot you could do with it. Maybe you'll find it useful as well. I'm just actually going to make a path here. I'm just going to click here. And remember, I had nothing selected, so I'm just making a path. It's not a mask. And I'm just going to click there. And what I can do now is this is just a simple path, but let's add a stroke to it. So I'm going to add a stroke, and I'm just going to add any color. That's fine. I want to play around with the stroke a little bit. So number one, this is going to be a trim path. And maybe if I have a certain one, I can be a little more descriptive. And I'm going to go to my contents, I'm going to go to my shape 1, I'm going to go to my stroke 1. Okay, let's play around with this a little bit, make this line a little more interesting. Number one, what I always like to do is I like to change the butt cap to round cap. And if I had more connectors, I could also make my corners round joins, but I don't really need that what I have right here. Another thing I can do, I like to taper, just to play around with what we can do here. So my start length, I'm just going to play around with that, and there's my taper there, so I have kind of this. So you kind of can assume what I'm going to do. I'm going to try to make this kind of appear and kind of come out of nowhere, this stripe. Now it's a little bit thicker, so let me bring down the stroke width. So I'm going to bring that down a little bit. There we go. And what I could also do, kind of wanted to, you know, underline the name there. I'm just going to reposition and kind of, you know, rotate that. There we go. And I'm just going to move it underneath. There we go. So if the name comes in a certain way, so that came in that way, and keep in mind, obviously right now I have the name appearing the whole way through, which is obviously not what I want to do. But I'm going to show you how to change that in just a second, because with this animation here. So I have my trim path. Oh, okay, wow, that's a lot going on. I don't want to see all that. So what I can do to collapse, when you have a lot of layers and you want to collapse them, you don't want to see everything. What you could do, if you press the keyboard command or the keystroke U, what it ends up doing, it collapses what is actually selected. Well, what if I have nothing selected? Press U again. It'll just show the keyframes of anything you have animated, just keyframes. If I press U again, it collapses everything. One more time, everything is collapsed. I press U, and it just shows the keyframes of anything that's being animated. Collapse it, do it one more time. There you go, it collapses it. If I press it twice, really quickly, it uncollapses everything. It just shows everything. So that's what I want to do. So U is going to be your best friend here. That's all I want to do now is just look at this right now. And you know what? I'm going to add a trim path. So I'm going to go to contents. I'm going to go add, and I'm going to click on trim paths. Okay, so let's see what we can do with trim paths. I'm going to twirl that down, and I'm just going to see where Jack Black appears. All right, there. Okay, now I'm going to create an animation here. So I'm going to say, number one, I don't want this to appear yet. So I'm going to bring it back over here. So now if I move this back here, that trim path won't appear. That line will not appear. It's only going to start appearing here. Okay, that visibility. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to do a trim path. I'm just going to do a quick start animation. Let's see what this does. So click on start. I'm going to move it forward. And I'm going to have it, actually it's going to become, see what's happening there? That's my animation. So at this point, I actually want it to be there. So this is going to be a 0%. And my first one here, I hold down shift, it snaps to it. I'm going to make it a 100%. So here's what we get. Oh, wrong way. That's not what I want. Okay, let's do an end animation and see what happens there. Click on end. That's where I want it. Great. And if I bring it back over here, I'm going to make it 0. And let's see what happens there. So it goes from the end and goes that way. Well, you know, I want something a little bit quicker, like a quick splash. All right, even quicker. All right, and now if I want, of course, easy ease, I could play around with these. Let me zoom in a little bit to those. All right, and I'm going to select those. I click on my graph editor, or I could quickly go ahead with both selected. Keyframe assistant, easy ease. Go to my graph editor. Now let's see what this does. I'll go to my graph editor in just a second. So it kind of does a slower, what it does, it kind of slow, fast, slow. So let's increase that even more. So I'm going to go slow. This is going to go slow, then really fast, then slow. Let's see how that works out. We could play around the graph editor all day. There we go. Kind of a little bit more interest, a little more intrigue in that simple animation. And let me go back to normal so I don't need the graph editor anymore. Zoom out, and let's just play this through. Cool, very simple, very easy, nothing too impressive there, but we could definitely play around a lot with this. Once again, you say, you know what, I kind of like where it is, but maybe I'll move it here, whatever, it doesn't matter. Now, I was talking about cutting off the frames here because, you know, we don't need the word, this particular word showing up the whole time through our full 90 seconds. I want to cut it off. Here's a quick way to cut it off. Now, obviously, you could just click and drag your point over here. I'm just going to move all this back over here. I can click and drag and say, you know what, I don't need this particular word to show up the whole time. I can just click and drag and bring it over here. And it only needs to show up for, say, this long, 5 seconds. Let's pretend. Okay. So it plays through. Great. That little line. And then it stops. I don't need to see it anymore. Maybe about the 5-second mark. That's fine. So that's where it disappears. That's great. But there's another quick way to do that. And if I just actually go back and leave that there, so let's say both of these, I want both of these things to disappear at the 5-second mark. I want the word and this trim path to disappear. I could actually select both of the layers, or all the layers that I want to trim the end. And I'm going to press Option, hold down Option or Alt on a PC, and I'm going to click on Close Bracket. And if I press Close Bracket, what it does, it trims off the end of it and right where the CTI is. Now the same is true if I want to bring everything to the beginning. So let's pretend these particular ones, I want them to start here. Sorry, I couldn't select that one because it's locked, which is fine. These two, let's just pretend I'm going to press Option, hold on Option, and this time I'm going to press Open Bracket. And what's going to happen is it's not going to come this way. These are going to come this way. I'm going to click that. And there I go. So now what I did was I said, no, you guys are going to start here now at the CTI by pressing Option Open Bracket does a trim at the beginning, and Option Close Bracket does an ending and trims off the ending of it. So now I just have these to work with wherever I want to put them. So that's kind of an interesting way to play around with those, just to show you how that might work. Now let's play around with a quick little layer style. I'm going to leave these alone. I'll bring these over here just at the start. I might not use these again, which is okay. So let's pretend I had this now trim path, and I was happy with that. Maybe I want to do something a little bit more with Jack Black here. The name, I'm going to add a layer style. So I'm just going to go up to layer. I have it selected, layer and layer styles. And I'm going to add a bit of a drop shadow. Very simple, nothing crazy. But I want to play around with it a little bit where I can, you know, there's a drop shadow, it shows up. And I don't want to see all like all these masks and everything, so I can actually click that off by clicking on this button here, toggle mask and shape path visibility. Just going to shut it off. I can still see my bounding box, which is great. So I have this drop shadow on there, and what I can do, I can see that it's right here, layer styles, blending options, great, but I'm looking at the drop shadow. Once again, with the eye, I could turn it on and off. I could do all these animated things here. Let's just keep it simple, and let's just do a opacity. So right here, right when that trim path is happening, I'm going to have this kind of start from a 0. So I'm going to click on the stopwatch first. It's going to be a 0, and then it's going to grow. I'm going to have like this kind of drop shadow grow right about here. And I'm just going to bring it up to, yeah, maybe 50%. So I'm just going to click on that 50. And that's it. It's very something simple. There we go. And now this drop shadow grows right there. Very simple, easy way to add layer styles. There's quite a few different layer styles we can add. If you want to do an interesting outer glow, a cover overlay, and add a stroke through your layer styles, you could do that too. So a lot of different ways to play around with layer styles. Definitely have some fun with that. A lot of different things we could do there. Next, I want to show maybe potentially how to work with a track matte or a mask and how we could actually bring some things in. Well, we have this option here where I already have this word. Let me start with another word. I'm just going to duplicate this. Maybe this one down here and just actually reset it. I'm going to shut this one off and shut that off. I'm going to start fresh here. And I'm going to go to my text, no, my transform. Both actually, I'm going to get rid of that. I'm going to get rid of the 3D. I'm going to reset. I'm going to make it visible. There I go. Great. Okay, so I have this word again. And remember, you're going to be typing out a few different words, obviously, for your different, the different names you have. So, you know, get ready to type all those out and kind of space them in a certain way and then introduce them however you want to animate them in, and then once again animate them out because they're not going to stay there the whole time. So just going to play with a very simple track matte. A couple different ways to play around with this is I'm just going to have a matte, or realistically a mask, that's going to kind of hide or reveal another object, which is going to be this word Jack Black. Okay, so without anything selected, I'm going to select a square on my rectangle tool, and I'm just going to place a square right over top of it. Doesn't really matter, and it doesn't matter, it doesn't need a stroke, but what I did know, found out it does need to have a fill in order for it to work properly. So I'm just going to add a very simple fill. Doesn't matter, any color will do because it's going to disappear anyways once we make it a track matte. Now, how does a track matte work? Very simply. Okay, so I have these two layers. The shape layer, I'm going to call this, I'm actually going to call it track matte. It's going to be an alpha track matte. The way it works is that this, above the actual layer that I want, this is going to become, this layer, this rectangle I made, is going to become the mask for the layer below it, which happens to be the type, Jack Black. Okay, so now I can work with that. So how do I actually set this up? Well, very simply. I click on the word Jack Black. That's the one that's going to become inside the mask of this rectangle layer. I'm going to go over to track matte. Once again, if you can't see it, right click, columns, modes, and it will show up. There's my track matte. I'm going to say be the alpha matte. So what this layer now is going to do, what this rectangle do, you saw what happened, it kind of just disappeared. Well, it does. The visibility of it disappears, but it still acts as an alpha matte for this layer. So it acts as a mask for this layer. So what it's doing right now, it's showing all the pixels from this layer, the alpha of those pixels, so the opacity of those pixels, which happens to be 100%. So what I can do, I can actually move this layer, the actual rectangle layer. Let me do a transform and I'll show you really quick, a quick position scrub. So I could actually have some of it hidden, some of it shown. That's what a mask does. It hides something and shows something. Or not only can I transform that one, I could also transform the word, which is the same. I can move it up or down and it does the same thing. So let's just do a quick animation here where it's going to reveal itself, but I'm going to animate the actual word, not the mask, or the matte I should say. So let's just do that, a quick position. So here I am, I'm going to click on position and I want it to be just above. So I'm going to click there and I'm going to move it up. There we go. And then I'm going to move it over just a bit and I'm going to bring it down again. There we go, easy. So it just kind of appears out of nowhere. A very simple way to play around with the track mattes. There we go. Nice and easy. Once again, if I want it to be a little bit quicker, I could be a little bit quicker. Get that space between them a little less, and it comes in faster. So a very, very simple way to play around with the track matte. And let me obviously show you a matte. So let me just duplicate this, Command D, and I brought it up there, and there is no matte on it. Okay, great. So I'm just going to show that, and let's see. I'm going to reset it and get rid of that keyframe. There we go. And I got to get rid of this one too. Now, there's some things happening here. And even though I know I'm just playing around very simply, what I should do is organize these based on color and make sure I name them properly. All that stuff. Like I have Jack Black 1, 2, 3, 4. These are obviously going to be different names, but it's always good because what's going to happen, and the way I worked with it was I label all my layers and all my layers are there. Then I start to color coordinate my layers. So, you know, this one and this one, they belong together, so I made them the same color. And then what happens later on, I pre-compose them on their own. So they're their own pre-composition, and I can move them around, do whatever I want. So that really helps me as I move along. Color your layers. It's going to really help you understand where certain things are moving, especially when you're collapsing things and, you know, not collapsing things, and tons of layers are being shown. So make sure that you really help yourself out there. So I'm just going to collapse everything. Great, and I'm just have this one here, and this is going to be a little bit different, so I'm going to make it a different color. Great, so I know it's there. Perfect. So I'm just going to play around with a mask. Now, a few different ways to add a mask to this layer. Let me move this over this way right here. Okay, great. My CTI is there. I'm going to add a mask. Now, a few ways: layer, mask, new mask, and it's just going to create a box just the same size as the bounding box. Another way to do it is to just make a square, and with it selected, once again, I could just make a square, and there's my mask right there. Okay, undo that, move that back, went too far. And now the other one I'm going to do is with my pen tool. I can make a simple mask with my pen tool. Just once again, the layer is selected, just click and drag, and there's my, only once I complete the actual shape does it become a mask. But I'm just going to do it the simple way. I'm just going to go to layer, mask, new mask, done. So it just makes it a perfect bounding box around the actual word. It doesn't hide anything, it just shows everything actually. So there's my mask right there. Mask 1, great. Now the way I can actually move this, very similar to the track mat, is actually do a bit of a mask path. So I could actually say, okay, right here, there's my the beginning there, my mask is good, I can see it, and this is where it is. I'm going to click on that stopwatch, and then what I can do is I'm going to move it over. I'm going to kind of hide it now. I'm going to select my mask. Now this can get a little tricky. I actually select my mask. If I have to, I can select my mask right here to know, so I know my mask is selected, and I can just move it over, and that's it. So now my mask is going to be here, and now it's going to be here. So there's another animation we can play around with. If you're not too familiar with track mats, or they're a little trickier, or you want to still do some kind of interesting animation like this, you can use masks, but I prefer track mats, but these work obviously really well too. We could obviously do another version of this with this mask expansion. I'm going to get rid of this. Let me bring it back to exactly where it needs to be, which is right here. Oh, a little too far. Great, and I'm going to get rid of that. And now I'm just going to do a mask expansion. Here's another way to play around with this. So I'm just going to click on that here, stopwatch, there's my keyframe, and I'm going to click on this, another keyframe here, but it's actually this keyframe I want to have my mask expansion to. I'm going to bring it down, negative pixels, and it kind of just disappears, because what it's doing, it's expanding or contracting the mask. So what I could do now is actually it kind of does like this rectangular reveal, obviously very slowly, but once again we could always control that too. All right, so there's another way to play around with masks and animating them. There's so many different things we could do with those. The next thing I want to play around with is camera. So now the camera space that we use can be very interesting. Now there's a couple things we do need to understand about the cameras, the type of cameras we use. I'm going to keep it very, very simple. Number one, cameras only work, once again, with our content. It has to be 3D content, so our 3D content is there. So let's work with actually this particular name we still have. Okay, great. Now, what can we do with the camera? Number one, let's set up a second view, 2 views, so we see the camera, what the camera is going to see as well. And let's add a camera. So right above Jack Black, this one I'm working on here, I'm going to add another camera, layer, new, and camera. Okay, now there's a lot going on here. I want to keep this super simple. There's also a camera video I made as well, which you could watch, goes into more detail. I'm going to make it one node. I'm going to keep it 50 mil. I'm actually going to call it 50 millimeter. That's the name of it. And I'm going to keep it very simple. I'm not going to touch anything else here. I don't know by default what yours has, but really enable depth of field, lock to zoom. What's going to happen here is a majority of these things I can change later on. Once the camera actually shows up, I can play with its parameters. So I'm just going to say, okay, done. There's my camera. Now, I see it's a camera. That's great. It's 50 millimeter. That's what I called it. I'm going to drop it down, and I have transform options. So here's some interesting options with my 1 node camera. If you use a 2 node, you're going to have an extra one called point of interest. That can be a little bit more, not confusing. It's great to play around with, but this is a really, really simple way to play with that. Now, as soon as I added that, I'm going to zoom out on this one. I can see there's my camera, and this is exactly what it sees. Everything's in focus. That's what it's seeing. Great. Now I do have these camera options here. So I have a zoom. So let's play around with the zoom really quick. Let's see what that does. So I'm zooming in, zooming out. Okay. It's kind of very similar to obviously a scale, but we're zooming in and out the camera. Okay, well, that's interesting. I'm going to undo that, Command Z. Depth of field on. So what happens if my camera goes in closer or further away? The depth of field is going to show that something's in focus, something's out of focus. Focus distance. And once again, we can actually animate any one of these. The focus distance, the aperture is going to create some blur. The level of blur. Let's see what we can do here. So what I'm going to do with my simple camera work is I'm just going to bring in the position of it. I'm just going to bring it in a little bit. So let's do a little animation here. And once again, I don't need my camera to be the whole length of my 90 seconds. I'm just going to chop it off here. Option, open bracket. Oh, I have to actually select it. Option, open bracket. And I'm going to do an option, close bracket right here to cut it off. Option, close bracket, or Alt if you're on a PC. And that's it. So now it only works here. So even though I added a camera and things are going to change a little bit, it only works from here to here. Then after this, it goes back to the normal camera, okay? Which is that default camera that we see, the active camera. Okay, so let's play around with this. What can we do? So I'm going to I'm just going to let it be seen first. So it shows up, great. So that mask animation worked. Then I'm just going to do a quick in and out Z axis. I'm going to bring it in. So this is the position I want right now. Then I'm going to hold down Shift and I'm going to bring it closer. And as I bring it closer, what actually happens is it starts to blur a little bit because the camera is getting a little out of focus now. The focus is over here, so it's losing its focus. Now, to be careful with this, definitely have to be careful with this. Your resolution does need to be at full to fully understand what is happening with the blur. Because if everything is blurry at third, because things are really slow, well, it's going to be blurry anyways. So make sure you're on full. Hopefully it renders well, and then you can get a better understanding of how it's going to work. So let's just say I'm going to do there's my camera. I'm going to bring it back to its normal state. Actually, I should have brought it here. I should have clicked on a keyframe first. So I'm just going to hold down Shift and bring it back so it's right in line. I'm just kind of measuring this up right here. Bring it back. Perfect. Okay, there's my keyframe. That's what I want. Now I'm going to zoom it in. So I'm going to bring this up, move my CTI over. Now I'm going to bring it up. I'm going to go a little further past the word right there. I'm going to actually go to this and bring this backwards, just so I could play around with this a little bit more. Go to my transform and bring that Z position a little further back. There we go. And I'll lock it again. And now I'm going to bring my camera back again. So once again, I can just click on this keyframe. I want it back into that original position, paste it, and there it is. All right, so I zoomed in, got a little blurry, zoom out, kind of came back. So let's see what that does. So it looks like I'm actually just scaling the word, but I get that blur in there, so I don't have to add an extra blur. I don't have to do anything like that. But let's continue going here. So this one, it went a little too far because I'm getting the white there, which I don't want. This is not what's going to render. This is what's going to render, the active camera. So let's make sure I move that there, and I bring it up a little bit closer. That's where I want it, right there. Perfect. And then I go to this one here, and I'll do the same thing. Perfect. Okay, so now I have that. Well, you know what? Let's do something interesting here. So when it gets to this point, maybe even here, I want the aperture to, give it even more. Right now the blur level is at 100%. I can even go beyond 100%, obviously, which is, interesting there too. So you know what? I could even help it along a little bit, I guess we could say. So let's do a blur. Let's add a little bit more blur. So I'm going to say no blur there, 100% normal. It moves in, and I'm still want it to be normal. Right about here, I'm going to add another keyframe, and at this point is where I want it to get really blurry, even blurrier than that. Let's go like this, really blurry. Okay, then I'm going to bring it back here, and I'm going to bring it back to 100. And here, yeah, now we're actually kind of good there. We don't really have to go back anymore. So let's look at that one more time. All right, really blurry, comes back. Nice, beautiful. Now, another way to play around with this too is not even just coming in and out. Let's see what we could do. I'm going to just hide that camera. All right. So what I can do is, and because that blue, what happened with the background, I pushed it back, I am getting that white there. So I'm going to bring it back actually to normal, which is right here, my position. I'm going to bring it back closer. There we go. My position will be proper. I could just reset it and it'll go back to normal, which is great. And I'm going to lock it again. So I'm going to bring in another camera. But this time I'm just going to do something a little bit different, but you might want to use it in your composition. So layer, new camera. I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'll keep it 50 mil. And one node, I'm just going to press OK. There it is. I got rid of the other one. And once again, I don't need it to be this big. So I'm just going to option. Open bracket, option, close bracket, great. So now what I want to do is I'm going to zoom in, but this time I'm going to actually move my camera around. So I'm going to kind of have it work here, but I'm going to shut off my depth of field because I don't want anything to be blurry. It's just everything's always going to be crystal clear. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to do some interesting work here with the camera. So once again, it shows up. Now I'm actually just going to play around with my transform. I'm going to do a simple position. And I'm just going to click that and I'm going to zoom in here. So there's my first. Okay. Oh, it didn't take that other keyframe. That's what I wanted. So reset that. There we go. Move it over. Now I can play with that. Okay, zoom in. Great. And now I'm going to kind of play around here a little bit. I'm going to do a, let's go to the, oh, it kind of tells you see what starts to happen here. Let me zoom in a little bit more. So we see what starts to happen here is how this is going to interact. So with this position, the second I played around, a point of interest showed up, which actually I don't want. So I'm going to click on that again. I'm going to get rid, it turned into a 2 node, and I don't want that. I want it to be a 1 node because that point of interest shows up, which I don't want. So I'm going to click on this, and now with my playing around here, sorry, when I press reset, it added that. So I'm going to press reset and it adds a point of interest, which I don't want. So I'm just going to, once again, I could just double click on the camera and I could set it back to a 1 node and get rid of that point of interest, because it's a little bit tricky to work with, but it is still pretty cool because instead of the 1 node, it just works around, it pivots around its own itself here, like it's on a tripod. With a point of interest, you have to move the point of interest and it pivots around the point of interest, not on as if it's on a tripod. But once again, the camera video shows you that a little bit more. We're just going to do something simple here. So I zoomed in, okay, and now I don't want to zoom out. I'm going to just get rid of that keyframe. I want it to stay there. And now I'm just going to move this camera around the type, because you might have some interesting graphics up here or over here, over here, over here. And you can actually move the camera around to pick up on those graphics, zoom out, zoom in, move around. So let's do a little bit of an X here. So I'm just going to move it around here. And it just kind of pans over. All right. And then I could maybe zoom in a little bit. Move it over. Let's just say that. And then I'm going to move this over here, and I'm just going to go across. Maybe and that's fine. And maybe on this next one, I'll zoom in. And remember, these keyframes are just remembering these specific coordinates. It's just kind of saying, hey, this is what I remember. I remember these, and that's all I need to remember. And then if I want this particular one, where did it go back? I'm just going to bring it back to this one. So I'm going to copy that one. I'm going to bring it back over here, and it's just going to go back to normal. There we go. So let's see what that does. So it's just kind of moving around. It's coming in close, and it's going to do a little bit of look over there, and then it's going to come over here. And once again, I could play around with quite a bit of easy ease and really have some fun with that. So another interesting way to play around with the camera. So once again, if you had a graphic here and different things, the camera could say, okay, I'm going to focus here, then I'm going to move over here and move over here. So many different things you can do with the camera. So I really hope you play around with that in an interesting way. The next thing I want to look at is lights. Let's look at lights. So I'm just going to shut this off. And I'm going to play around once again over here. It just shows up perfect. And now I'm going to add a light layer, new light. Remember, the light will work only where it shows up. So right now I'm going to do a point light. You can do a spot and point light are probably the best one for your situation where you can really see what the light is doing. Parallel and ambient are more just a larger light that just happens to be there. It's kind of almost like acting like the sun, like just this big large light. So I'm going to focus on point light. Let's just look at that. And I'm going to leave all this because I could change all these things after. I'm going to say, okay, well, there's the light right there. It adds pretty cool something to it. So I'm just going to have that. Once again, I'm going to cut this off. I'm going to make it show up here.
Option, open bracket, Option, close bracket. All right, there we go. And now I could play around with it. Well, what can I do with a point light? Well, I could actually play around with some transform and some light options. So the only thing I could do, I could change the position of it. Okay, that's good. I could play around the intensity, the color. So let's say my intensity is going to start. So once it shows up there, I don't want it to happen yet. The light's not going to show up yet. I can play around with the position, but I still want to play around that intensity. So I could even kind of act as almost a transition if I wanted to go from zero black to something more, but I am going to play with that intensity a little bit more. Oh, I added an extra keyframe, don't want that. Okay, there I am. And then I'm going to bring up my intensity a little bit more. Okay, so there's a quick little animation there from a normal to light, kind of brightens up, and I can bring it back to normal. Bring it right here, make it 100%. Okay. So it does kind of like a little bit of a flash, but I could always do that really quickly and make it seem more like a flash. Okay, and now let's play around with some positions. So I'm just going to move this around. So here it is normally, and here's my light right here actually. So if I want to move it around, I can manually move it around in my 3D space, but I'm just going to do it here with my X and Y, and I'm just going to move it over here. Oh, let's keep that actually normal. Let's move this over. Then I'm going to move it over here. And then I'll do a move over here. All right, so maybe there's a way for you to animate this and utilize the light to kind of create some interesting focus. But I am going to do one more for you. I'm going to shut this one off. I'm going to use the spotlight because you might find this a little bit more useful, potentially. New light, and it's going to be a spotlight this time. So it's going to have more of a cone shape, which is pretty cool, and very specific lighting here. So okay, that's all right. I'm going to do the same thing I did before. Click on that option, open bracket, Option, close bracket. Okay, and now I'm just going to play around with the spotlight a little bit more. So I have a few more transform options: point of interest, position, orientation. I have a lot of things I could do here, but I want to play with this cone feather first off, so I could really kind of more like diffuse that hard edge. The cone angle, I could bring it up, make it a little bit bigger. Great. But even if I did something like this, and let's just do a position change, I'm going to make it kind of look like a flashlight looking around. So I can actually move the position. Now the position will be based on the point of interest. So the point of interest right now is in the middle there. That's great. So I could actually, I'm not going to do an animation yet. Just see how it just kind of moves around. So instead of doing a position change, I'm going to do a point of interest animation. So I'm actually going to move the point of interest around. So it's going to kind of work like that. Okay. So I set that there, and what I'll do, it just shows up. Where was it there? There to there. Let's just say that just happens. There's other ways to obviously do an opacity to just bring that in. And we're just going to do a quick little animation here. So it starts there. Then it's going to go here. It's going to move over this way. Kind of go off. And come back. Do a sweep through kind of idea. And then come back. Right to the middle. All right, there we go. So let's see that animation. So a pretty fun way to play around with these, obviously. Some interest that we could play around with. A lot of different options here, but once again, we're just kind of playing around, having a good time. If I want to, I could add a drop shadow on this without using layer styles. That's all I need is my light source. The actual word that is being hit also needs, because it's 3D, and it has been 3D, I could actually go to my material options and make sure that it cast shadow is on. And now it's going to have a cast shadow, but I also have to make sure that my background accepts. So remember, the background is also 3D, that it accepts shadows, and that's on. Yeah, so it accepts shadows. Great. So now that's all I need to do is the word Jack Black needs to be a little bit further away from the background so you can see the shadow. So let's take the word Jack Black and move it. Let's give it a transform, and let's give it a Z and move it away and now my cast shadow shows up. And now when I do my light, what should happen is it should interact with it too, and shows it and kind of plays around with it. Pretty cool way. And let's also do it and see how it interacted with my other camera too, my point light. So the spotlight didn't really play with it too much. It kind of kept it right on right exactly where it was, which was odd. But the point light actually moves it around, which is pretty interesting. I like that. Okay, so just a different play with lights, fun to play around with, definitely something to add some interest, the camera as well, some pretty cool things we could do there. Now the next thing I want to show you are some transitions. So let's pretend we're going from one scene to another, obviously. So we have one, I'm going to lock this again. I have one, I'm going to get rid of these lights as well so they don't interfere too much. I have one Jack Black, and then I have another one show up. So I have this one here. All right. Cool. And then I'm going to have my other one show up right here. Then the other one shows up. Okay, but maybe I want to transition between the both. Well, let's do a simple opening transition. I'm going to move these both over. Actually, I just need this one. Command click and move that over. I'm actually going to do a fade in from black. All right. So very simple way to do any kind of transition. Fade in, fade out, black, white, doesn't really matter. I'm just going to create a solid layer. Layer new, solid. And if I want it to be a fade in from black, I'll make it black. If I want to do a fade in from white, make it white. So I'm just going to do black for now. And I'm just going to press OK. And there it is. Now, once again, I don't need it to be the full size of my composition, so I'm going to cut it off. And it needs to be pretty short. It doesn't have to need to be long, but you could always extend it any size you want. Option, end bracket, close bracket actually, and it trims it off. Okay, that's all I need right there. So what I want to do, I want to have this kind of just fade in. Very, very simple. I'm going to click on this, and let's name this properly. This is going to be a fade in black. Okay, and I'm going to go to my transition or my transform and a simple opacity. That's all we have to do. So it starts off 100% and then it just goes to 0. And that's your fade in. That's it. Very, very simple. So have my keyframe there. Click on my stopwatch, make that. And I just go over and I make it 0. And there's my fade in. Really, really simple. Make sure I get my 0. There we go. And that's it. It fades in from black and it goes into, you know, whatever animation I have going there. Sorry, there we go. All right, so fades in, and then my other would start, but I need to make sure that they are pulled back. So this is the one that's showing right here. I'm gonna bring it in. There we go. So fades in, and then it starts. Let's start that from the beginning. Press spacebar. So very simple, and I can change the color of that anytime I want, and then it's going to go into the next one. So I have this little bit of space here. Let me move these down. I'm going to move those so they kind of get out of the way. Underneath, and bring this back up. So I can see this is going to interact with, where was my other one? Right there. So I'm going to put these next to each other. Okay. So more or less, this is what's going to happen. We're going to have that there. And then the other one's going to come up. Okay. I'm going to put all this stuff underneath. For now, I don't really need it, so I'm just going to move it so they don't interfere with the two things that I want to play with, this and this. So there's a bit of room here that I could play with, okay? So this happens, then it stops, it just cuts out, which I could make it fade out, I could do whatever I want. And then this, well, what if I put a transition in between there? Let's look at some of the other transitions I have. So if I actually click on here and type in transition, okay. Well, they should show up, which they're not showing up right now. Where's my effects? Come on. Nah, this always happens to me. Anyways, doesn't matter. They're actually all right here, transition. So let's look at that. Or once again, of course, you can go to effect, and actually let me click off of that. Go to effect. And transition, we can see that there. And all of these are transitions. They're pretty interesting. You can play around with them 100 different ways. So let's just pick one. Let's do a iris swipe. Let's see what this does. Okay, so I have that, and what I did was I actually applied it to an actual layer that's already there. Well, let's see what that does. What I would actually prefer to do is add it to a solid layer. I'm not going to put it on this actual layer. So I'm going to create a new layer, new, solid. And I'll just say, okay, it's black, that's fine. And it showed up there. And once again, I don't need it to be the full length. It's going to be a short part of it. It's going to just let me do a transition from here to here. So I'm just going to put it between the two layers. There I go. I don't want this one to be an alpha. I just want it to be no. Great. So that shows up. That shows up. Awesome. So this little transition in the middle. Let me actually change the color of it so we can see how we can do that. Great. So this happens. Then transition, then the next one happens. So let's see what this does. So I'm going to add in that effect to this layer, that actual transition, the iris swipe. Click on it, and now it's added. Okay, I'm going to twirl it down. I see the effects are on. Iris swipe, great. Iris center, iris point, so we could play with it up here. So let's actually do some play. Well, let's scrub through and see what actually happens here, if anything happens. Okay, well, that's my center point. I don't want that. Iris points. How many do I need? Let's see when that actually happens. Outer radius. Let's see, and then let's look at the rotation. Not much is happening there. Okay, so let's increase my points. Let's increase my outer radius. And we see now that is my actual animation. Okay, so I'm probably be animating my outer radius. Great. Let's add some points here. Okay, maybe that'll be it there. Great. Let's do a little bit of a feather. Let's add some feather to that. Not too much. I still want to get a bit of that. Okay, if there's a rotation, no, because it's a very circular type thing there. We don't got to worry too much about that. And no, let's not add that. Great. So I'm just going to do an outer radius. So it's going to go from nothing to something. And that's it. It's going to be pretty simple. So let's do that. So here it is. I'm going to do it down here because anytime I'm adding any kind of animation, I want actually to have it down here in my time frame or my my timeline. So there it is. At this point, it's going to have 1 and it's going to start off at nothing. Okay. And then it's going to go to something and then nothing. Okay. So right here, this is going to be full black. So that's going to be full black. This one is going to be the opposite. I'm going to bring it up. There we go. And I'm just going to copy that keyframe because that's exactly what I want here. Paste it in, and there's my animation. There's my very simple transition. It goes from that one, shuts it off, and it brings it back to this one. Now, right at this point, right at the center point where it goes black, that full point right there, this is where this new one should start. Or if I want to bring it in even more, so if I hover over, maybe it starts right away, maybe it has already started. It's entirely up to you how you want that to work. So I have this kind of interruption where this happens, a little bit of an interruption, and then the next thing happens. So it's a great way to hide things and start things. So let's actually play that, see how that goes through. All right. Now, if I want to have this last a little bit longer, of course, copy that, bring it over, paste it. It's going to last a little bit longer. There we go. And now the next thing starts. So there's just so many different transitions you can play around with, and they all do they all work the same way. Now the thing that I like to do, I like to place them on their own solid layer. So once again, I should probably call this. Click on that. Transition. And if it was the iris swipe, or I could just say wipe. And there I go. And I know what that is, and I could use it again and again and again. I just copy it. So if I want to copy it again or use it again, I copy it. Or sorry, just Command D or Control D on a PC, move it over. And now it's going to happen again here onto the next thing. So if I copy this again, Command D, bring it over. Here it is. So there's my type, my transition, and then my type again. So here it goes again. Same thing. Okay. So you can play around with those, and however those work best for you. So many different ways to do transitions. Have some fun with those. You can make your own manually, or you could use, obviously, some of the effects that we already have there. Now, the thing I mentioned before is using some pre-compositions. So what I've done here is there's not too much happening, obviously, right now with what I have. And, you know, composing a certain amount of layers might come in handy if we're looking at something that's more intact with what we were talking about. So I'm going to go and show you something I've already put together with my other animation, my full open title scene, and give you some pointers there as well. All right, so here I've opened up my actual open title sequence that I've already made, and as you can see, it kind of goes through and it works well and everything's nice here. But what I've actually done here is I've made a lot of pre-compositions. So I've taken a certain area and pre-composed it, and another area and another area, and so on. So if I just actually double click inside of this and take a peek and see what is actually going on. So I'm double click inside. Okay, there's a few different ones here. So what's actually happening? Well, this is what's happening. And what I did was I actually added a background layer for my guide, right click, and I made it a guide, so guide layer. Now I can copy a layer, any layer, from any comp to any other comp I want, which I'm going to show you in just a second. So right here, what I have is I have this fade in, this black solid fade in, and then it shows the information. I'm just scrubbing through, does a little sound effect, brings in some type, more type, and then here we go. Over and over and over, there we go, and then it ends, and that's it. Great. But what I want to do is I'm just going to show you what I did here. I'm just going to copy this information, copy, select all my layers, and I'm going to bring it in here. So this is the actual credit, the comp that I have. I'm going to just paste, and when I paste it in, it brings in all my information that I just had. All the layers that were in this comp are now right here, and that's exactly what I want. So what I can do now is play around with that, and I just wanted to show you that now that these are all selected, I can make a pre-comp. I could actually have had this, because mainly I had all my layers set out in a certain way, way too much going on, so I could actually pre-compose them, right click and pre-compose, and it'll make that composition set up there in one pre-comp, which is really nice. So once again, I'm just going to undo that. I can double click on my mask. Okay, what's inside of my mask pre-composition? Well, I have this picture of the mask and it's doing certain things, and I have a few graphics in here overlaid over top. Okay, so that's the three. I bring it back and they show up here. This is where the pre-comps show. I could delete them because I don't need them. I could open them up anytime. Well, what's inside my picture transition? Well, let's take a look. So I look inside my picture transition. Remember, it's just a small little area here. So I'm going to double click on that. And I'm just going to scrub through. So what happens here? Okay, I have a transition effect that I added. Then I add in a picture. But with the picture, I added in some camera. I added in some lights. I added in a few different things. So here's my camera. It's doing something here. It's kind of going in and out. So it zooms in, zooms out, and adds some blur, which I added even more blur. And I also added some lights. So the light here is kind of flickering at the moment right here. Flickers on and off, and then it just zooms back out and it does that transition again. That's the whole composition right there. Now here's something interesting that I want to show you with these compositions. So let's pretend I want to do something else. I'm going to go back to my main. Now I have that composition set up. I had the wipe, I had the light, I had the camera, I had everything, but I want to change the picture. Well, that's exactly what I did. So my next one, I did it, but now it's the exact same template, but it's a different picture. Well, how'd you do that? The great thing here is that I can actually create one composition, but one of the pieces of footage, the picture that happens to be here, I could actually swap it out in a really, really simple way. So let me show you how to do that. So I've set it up already. It's good to go. What I can do now, I'm going to go to my comps here, and I see all my comps. Well, what's the name of these comps? Let's take a quick peek. So this was picture transition. So there's picture transition. Now, this is very important to do though, because if you don't duplicate it the correct way, you're just going to overwrite the composition you already have. So I have this comp, and let's duplicate it here. I'm going to duplicate it in the project panel. If I duplicate it down here, I'm only duplicating the comp, and it's just going to overwrite itself if I make any changes. So on this one, it's called picture transition. I'm going to go to edit and duplicate, or Command D or Control D. And now it's duplicated. Picture transition 6, because I've already had 2, 3, 4, and 5. I already made them myself. So here's number 6. So what I can do, I'm going to click and drag and bring it onto I'll bring it right at the top so you can see it. There it is right there. Great. And here it is. That's kind of what I see right on top. Now the thing is, it already has this picture, but I want to change the picture. I want everything to stay the exact same, but I just want to change the picture. It's really, really simple. I'm going to double click inside, and I see everything. And once again, I can play around with the fade in, and I can play around with a lot of different things here. But I'm going to click on this picture, which happens to be right here. This is the footage I want to change. This could be an image, it could be a video, it could be anything. And I want to swap out this footage. Okay, so let me take a look at some of the other graphics I have to swap out to. So here are some of the images I've already brought in. Well, how do I do that? Well, let me scroll through them. As I scroll through them, I'm able to see what they are up here. Well, there's one picture, there's another picture, and another, and another. And which one I don't have? I don't have this one yet. Okay, great. So I select this. That's what I want to switch. I'm going to select this in my project panel. Now my project panel is selected. I hold down Command, Option, and forward slash. So what that'll be Control Alt forward slash. And that is it. It swapped out the footage. Everything else stayed the same. My fade in stayed the same. My camera and light stayed the same. And everything that happened to this graphic, all the transitions, any other effects or anything at all, it all will get changed to that new footage. And that's it. I'm good to go. So if I go back to my main and I click on it now, and turn that down a little bit, or just shut it off, everything stays the same. But that new footage comes in. So a great way to swap out footage. Starts going really slow. And that's all right. And that's it. So a great way to swap footage if you ever need to. Another thing I want to show is an interesting way to bring in images. So I have these images here in my, remember, I organize your folders in the best way possible. You have your main name, you have an AEP file where your AEP goes. You have your assets. Well, I have an audio file, an audio folder with all my audio. I have my graphics. All my graphics are here. I made a couple Illustrator files. I had this thing of textures I found and Envato elements. I found some movie stills that I took from the actual movie, just did some screenshots. Well, these textures here, when I bring these in, I could either bring these in manually one at a time, but watch what happens when I bring in the folder of textures. So I'm going to bring in this folder into I'm actually going to put in my graphics, click and drag, and it shows up just like that. It shows up as all my images together. Not just one image and then it shows them all separately. It shows them as a whole amount of images. So what I can do is I'll double click on that and it shows me all the images I have there. So that's one way that we could look at that. If I just press play here in my footage comp, it just goes through all the footage. It goes through every single one. Now, maybe I don't want that. Maybe I don't want to see it that way. I'm just going to delete that here in my comp panel. And what I'll do instead is I'll go to my same one. I'll select them all. Not from the folder, but select them all individually, then bring them into my graphics, and now they show up as separate ones. So just keep that in mind. If you have a folder full of images, they will show up kind of as this sequential image set, which is fine. You can play around with them a few different ways too. I could click and drag and bring them in, and now it's its own thing here, but it's its own little animation right there. That's it. That's the animation right there. But you could use that. You can use that as an animation if you'd like, of course. Or what I did here, I set them all separately. I made this texture animation, which is a part of my background. So I'm just going to delete these because I already had these from before. And what I can do in my background, my background composition, I have them all set out. Here's my textures right here. I have all those images right there, exactly like that. All right, and they're all set out, they're all played a certain way. So it's one interesting way to bring in a lot of images and play around with them and kind of have some fun there. But I'm just going to close all these comps because they're not necessary there. And there we go. Now, a couple things I want to show you as well and make sure that we are familiar with is when we do bring in our graphics. So let me go back to my main comp, which I'm here. My main graphic, I have this one here. So if I bring this over, I'm going to delete this. I don't need this anymore. If I go all the way to the end, okay, I have this graphic here that I traced out from an image still. There it is. Now, what you should do with all your graphics that you bring in, any graphic you do bring in, you should definitely continuously rasterize it so that the quality of the edge of it will always remain really clear, crisp, and clean. We definitely want that. So make sure any graphics you bring in, you continuously rasterize. That way, if you scale it up or scale it down, the edge of them will always be clean and exactly what we want to see. If you don't, let me zoom in a little bit. What happens is we're going to get a little bit more of a fuzzy edge, which is fine, but we probably don't want that, because especially the fact that I brought in some vector graphics, we're going to get a cleaner edge. Now, here you can't see it necessarily. I'm at 400%, but if I zoom in, zoom out, which I believe this one does, at this point now I'm adding a camera blur, so it's hard to tell anyways. But I wonder if I did. No, can't really tell too well. But I am adding a blur, so that doesn't really matter here. But in general, if you want those clean edges, you definitely want to add a continuously rasterize. This little icon here, make sure it's on the switches, and it'll give you those really clean edges that you want. Now remember, if there's any adjustment layer you want to bring in, anything at all, everything can go just on that adjustment layer. Let me show you what I mean. So let's pretend I wanted to change the overall look of everything here. I want to add some kind of effect to it. I can actually have an adjustment layer. I'm going to layer, new, adjustment layer, and I can apply an effect to that adjustment layer, and that effect will apply to this layer, which happens to be over top of everything. So let me add a color correction. Let me go color correction, and let me add a hue saturation. Click and drag, bring it onto my adjustment layer. Now that effect is on this adjustment layer. It will affect everything below it. Let's see what it does. All right, so now here, there's my effect. I'm gonna go up here and let's just change a little bit of a hue saturation. Let's kind of take some color away from everything. Just try it out. It affects everything. Now, because everything is below it. If I bring this down, say even below my mask, that's the mask color here. Let's bring this down. Just gonna bring it below the mask. Now it doesn't affect the mask, but it affects everything below the mask. All right, which happens to be everything we see. The background, yeah, but not the mask. It affects intro credits, sure, but depending on what the color is there. So it will only affect certain things that are below it, nothing above it. So we'll bring it all the way to the top. Now it affects everything. So let's do it for here as well. So this graphic here, if I bring it just below that, it will not affect that graphic. We saw it change back to its normal color. So a really interesting way to add different corrections or any effects actually whatsoever on an adjustment layer, and then you could have them apply a certain way. You can control the blending mode, you can control so many different things with adjustment layers. So let's actually play around with that blending mode. I do want to show you that as well. So let's pretend I did something a little silly here and I changed the color. That's actually not too bad, but I want to play around with the blending mode. So let me play around with some modes. Once again, it's on normal by default. If I play around with the different modes, obviously different things are going to happen. So the quick way to go through those is actually holding down Shift and minus or plus. So if I go through Shift plus, it's actually going to go down the line of all the different ones it sees. Okay, so color, dodge, classic, linear, lighten, overlay. So let's just click one. I just want to see, let's just try this one. Pretty cool. Linear light, great. And once again, if I bring it down below, it only affects everything below it. If I go through, scrub through again, kind of does something pretty interesting there. Creates a pretty cool effect. Now it's going really slow, so let me play that through lower resolution. Wow. But once again, we can add these adjustment layers, we could add different effects to them, and they can provide a lot of different ways to create interest, to create some dimension to some of these graphics. After we're done the motion, we could add all these things after. So that's a really cool thing too, that once your animation's done, you're pretty happy with the way it looks, you could actually start adding so many more different effects and treatments to it that could really set it off and really help it along, creating some excitement, something different in terms of its tone. Actually, once again, we're talking about tone and setting a certain tone for the movie or the TV you're about to show. Well, maybe there is a way to add adjustment layers to make it more, set into a certain setting. If it's a Western movie, then you're going to have maybe a different, like maybe add some sepia tone, or if it's different like that, it's a retro movie, you're going to add in some interesting colors or something like that. So there's a lot of different ways to play around with this. I hope this helps get you going on your open title sequence, playing around with obviously some audio as well. Bring in some audio and trim it up if you need to trim it up. Playing around with it, obviously we're able to play with the audio in terms of its waveform, so we could say we want to maybe even fade it in or fade it out. If we want to play around with our audio here, we can control some of that audio, how loud it gets, and obviously control that, especially if you're going to add in some sound effects too, which I did. So just be careful with how you play with that. But once again, it can move with the music. It can be something very simple, or it could be something very strong that you work with, or like I said, just some simple underlining sounds that help control the tone of your TV or movie opening title sequence. And once again, another thing I wanted to mention, now that I have everything set up and everything was looking good, and this is how I initially had it, where I had, my controlled layers here. I had all my main audio, which was set up here. It goes all the way through. I had a few different bell rings, kind of some interesting sound effects that I played around with and just, scrolled through and how I want them set up. Once again, if it was all the way through, I was actually able to trim it down and say, I only want this much to show and I wanted to show here, so I could play around with the audio a little bit. Then I had my background set up with the texture on it. Remember, that texture was, that cycle through of the pattern. It kind of just goes through over and over and over again. Let me bring that down, yeah. And it kind of just goes through them over and over and over, and then it just overlays. And what I chose to do here in my textures is to add, here I did a little blending mode, so it just kind of interacted well with the background. But once again, I have these set up here, and I have my color coordination, where I had my yellow is like my intro production companies, and then I had a mask, that main mask that I had playing around. Then I had my picture transition, so these are all my different transitions that I had. I made those. Then I added, I separated it in terms of how a grouping of the type that I brought in. Then here was the title, and then here were the names of the actors, and then here was the name of the production assistant, designer, costume designer, and all that. Then I separated it even more. We could see kind of what it does over here. But what I should do now, because this comes, I could play around with this, but it can be overwhelming, I should pre-compose these. So let's look at pre-composing. So here I have first my textures and my background. I want my texture, which only really has a relationship with my background layer, to be together. So I'm going to select those two, right click, and I'm going to pre-compose. Now it asks me, it says, okay, well, first of all, what's the name of it? Well, I'm going to call this background. And that's my background. I can play around with this separately. It's going to move all the attributes, to my new composition, yes. Adjust the composition duration to the time span of selected layer. So these go all the way through. So that doesn't really matter, because they're going to be all the way, because the background appears in the back of the whole composition. So I don't really need to worry about that. I'm just going to say, okay, I'm going to shut that off, say, okay, done. So now both of those, texture and background blue, are now in their own composition. Perfect. I'm actually going to close all these so that when I do open them, I know exactly where they are. I can close these and open them back up again anytime I want. Okay, now let's do the same thing with our yellow here. So we have our yellow set up. So this is going to be our intro information. So this is our fade into black and our production company, another production company, another production company. Just that, not the mask. The mask is on its own. So I'm going to select all those, right click, and pre-compose. And this time I want to adjust it, because what's going to happen now, because my layers only go this far, I don't actually need to have my composition have a whole 90 seconds. It could actually go from here to here, and that's it. So I was like, okay, so I'm going to adjust the composition duration to the time span of the actual selected layers. I'll say okay, and I'm going to name this properly. This I will call the production companies. Or even my opening intro, whatever, doesn't really matter. I'll say, okay, there it is. Everything's inside there. So let's look at that. Double click on it. Yeah, everything is in there. And it's only showing me, if I go back here, it only has the time span of the actual selected layer. So it only goes that far. So if I move it over here accidentally, I got to be careful. I got to bring it back and make sure it lines up properly, because now, because it's not the actual length of my whole 90 seconds, I actually have to make sure it fits in properly to where it goes. All right, the mask, it shows up the whole time. My picture transition, great. I've shown you that before. If I double click inside, this is my picture transition. I see a transition, a wipe. I did a jaws, and then I add in a camera effect, lighting effect. I add in a picture. I do a little more work with the camera and zoom it back out, and then I'm back to normal. So that's what my main transitions look like. I kept them all the same. And what I did was just swap out the footage in a really interesting way. And then next I have my title sequence. So if I click on my sound, and remember, they're all labeled with color, much in a nice way. So I kind of preparing myself to make a pre-comp, and I pre-compose. And I'm going to do the same thing, but this time this is actually called title. So I'll just call that title. And I do want to adjust the composition once again. So it only goes from here to here. That's it. And I'm going to do the same with these. These are all the actors' names. Right click, pre-compose, or I can go to layer and pre-compose. It's also there too. And I'm going to call those the actors. All right. And same thing. So it's only going to be from here to here. And that's it. That's the size of it right there, the actors. Okay, now let's keep going. I'll do the green. Pre-compose, and this is, I'm just going to call these the casting, let's just say, just for quick, and I'll say okay, and I'll do one more for my director and my producers. Pre-compose, and I'll just call this directors, and okay, and there I go. So now it's much cleaner. I can go inside and play around with these anytime I want, go back in directors, maybe there's something else I want to do here. And once again, it's like, oh, you know what? I don't know how it looks like on the background, right? It's white, it doesn't look right. Well, how can I actually bring it in so I could see what my background looks like? Very simply. And this is a really cool thing. I double click on background. There's my background. That is actually the background for my whole composite, my whole movie. I'm going to copy it, Command C or Control C. Go to my main title sequence. Oh no, I want it to be in here, my directors. So I'm going to paste it in. Here I am in this composition. Even though it was in this composition, I had to go another composition to get it. My background composition, I want to put it in this composition, paste it. There it is, right there. Well, it's on top, not a problem. Let's bring it down to the bottom. Great. Well, won't it show up as a background in this composition? Not if I make it a guide. Right click, guide layer. Now it's not going to show up as a background layer in this composition. It's only going to be used as a guide in that composition. See, it did not show up. Which should have been right here, blocking out everything below it. So that's pretty good. So there's a way to copy and paste all of our layers into other comps anywhere you want, which is a quick way, simple way to play around with that. So once again, I hope this helps organize yourself, prepare yourself for when you're actually making this as you go through it, and really create some interesting opening title sequences that really set a nice tone for what the viewer is about to see.
One last thing I do want to do here is to show you how to render this out, as I normally do in these videos. So let's take a peek at that. What I did want to do is composition, and I do want you to do this through Media Encoder queue. Instead of the render queue through After Effects, I want to do it through Media Encoder, so let's click on that. Alright, so Media Encoder is all queued up, it's ready to go, so here it is. And right off the bat I have H.264, which is what I want. Match source high bitrate, great, and that's really all I have to do, but I can take a little further look in here. Just click on my blue match source high bitrate and see some of the specs. And here I go. So yes, exactly. H.264, match the source high bitrate, main title sequence, and I can go through here and look at some of the video and obviously some of the effects I had. I don't really need to do this. I'm just going to look at my video. I'm happy with that. Render at maximum depth, sure. Use maximum render quality, sure. And just press OK. And now it's not done yet. I'm going to make sure, where do I save this properly? So save it in your proper folder. So mine happens to be on my desktop at the moment, and that's where it was. Here it is. I'm gonna, and I made a final folder. Now I already have one in there, but I'm going to put this one in here as well, main title sequence, but I need to name it properly. So that's last name, first initial, section number. So I want to make sure you have that. And I'm just going to call this title sequence. Now I believe this is what I called it on the assignment sheet as well, so that's fine. Title sequence, and it's going to be an MP4, which is great. I'm going to save it. Great, so I have the location where it's saved. I have saved it properly. Now I'm just going to press on the green triangle, and it's going to encode it for me right here.
All right, I get my check mark, it's ready to go. Now, once again, if I didn't name it or save it in the proper place, I can just click on this link and it will actually open it up. And let me do that now. I'm going to click on it. And I did save it in my proper folder, in my final folder. And there it is right now. And what I like to use VLC. So I'm going to just open with VLC. And it's going to play it for me. And there I have it. So my final, I was happy with it. I implemented all the things I needed to implement off my checklist. I've made it 24 frames per second, 1920, 1080. I've used 90 seconds worth or more, and kind of introduced all these great elements and set a pretty interesting tone and fun for what I wanted my video to be like. But once again, you could always go back and fix this up later on, but hopefully this works out for you and you got some great learning from this and really enjoyed kind of making it as well. And learn a lot of different things. So definitely utilize everything that you have learned so far and make something pretty amazing.